Okay, so today's discussion is about pointers. So this video, which I'm recording, will give you some details about pointers. I'll share the slides, and then I'll also run some of the code that I've written for explaining what pointers are. Okay, so I think the definition of the pointers, you are well aware of that. A pointer is a variable whose value is the address of another variable. So the address of the variable is stored in a pointer. So the value that is stored in this pointer variable is the address of a variable rather than a value. So a value is not stored. In fact, the address of a particular variable is actually stored. The declaration of a of a pointer is done as shown here in this declaration in red, where you have the type of the pointer. The type of the pointer is given, followed by a asterisk sign, followed by the name of the pointer variable. Now this type is basically of the variable type of which the address is to be stored. So if you want to store the address of an integer variable, then the type would be integer in this particular case. So this would be the declaration part of a pointer. Now the next thing is that once you have declared a pointer, then you also need to initialize that pointer. And before moving on to that bit, here are the different types of pointers that you can actually define. For example, you can have an integer pointer, you can have a float pointer, you can have char, you can have double, you can have integer, and all of them are actually using the same syntax that is being shown here in case of the declaration. Now the next bit is that once you have declared a pointer, here an integer type pointer is declared, static sign, you need to remember that this static sign is there, that would indicate that you are declaring a pointer. So the name of the pointer or the variable pointer is ptr that has been declared in this particular case. Then in order to initialize a pointer, you have to initialize it with some memory address. So suppose you declare an integer variable x that has got a certain value. This value is stored at a certain address in the memory, and with that address you can initialize this pointer. So that means that in order to initialize the pointer, you have to write down this statement, where on the left hand side you have the name of the pointer, which is same as one which is used in the declaration, followed by the assignment sign, followed by the ampersand variable. Ampersand variable is primarily retrieving the address of this variable x. So the address of this variable x is stored in this pointer. And now if you want to print this variable, if you want to access this variable, if you want to use this variable anywhere in your program, instead of using x, you can use the pointer variable in order to access this particular variable. Okay, so let's take this example, and I'll just show you this example in an IDE, and for that purpose I'll just copy this uh, code in the environment, and then I'll explain what this code is all about. Okay, this explains some of the basic stuff related to the pointers. Okay, so I'll just show you that how this code actually runs. Okay, right. So let me share this. Right, let me just share the screen with you. Okay, so here is the IDE, the C++ environment that we have got, and you can look at this code here. These are the standard inclusions, various libraries that we have. followed by the main program, and in this main program line number 14 is declaring a variable of type integer and it's assigned a value 20. Okay, line 15 is primarily the declaration of a pointer IP, and line number 16 is the initialization of this pointer IP. Now let's just run some cout statements and see what type of addresses are stored in this particular case. So line number 16 is, as you can see, is actually printing the value of the variable. So we should expect the value of this variable var, which is 20, to be printed. Okay, then let's move on to line number 22. Line number 22, you can see that cout statement, and in this cout statement we are printing IP, which is the name of the pointer variable. Okay, so this is the name of the pointer variable. Now remember, you know that this pointer variable stores what? It stores the address of var. So IP, if you say cout IP, it would print the address of var because that is being stored in IP, right? And we can counter check this by line number 25, which is using ampersand with var. Ampersand var would print the memory address of the variable var. So what should happen is that line number 22 and line number 25, they should generate the same memory address. They should generate the same memory address. Line number 28 is static IP. Static IP is a standard format that is being used in order to in order to dereference the pointer. Dereferencing would mean that now the pointer will not print the address; it would print the value it is pointing to. Okay, the value that is stored at the address to which this pointer is pointing. ठीक है, तो static IP उस value determine कर देगा. तो IP points to the address of VAR. Static IP points to the value of VAR. Okay, and line number 31, that is with ampersand IP. Ampersand IP would return the address of the pointer itself. Okay, so now there are two addresses we are talking about. One is the address of the pointer itself. The second one is the address that is stored in that pointer, or the address to which this pointer is pointing to. ठीक है, तो अगर IP सिर्फ आप लिखते हैं, that would give you the address the pointer is pointing to, and if you are putting ampersand with IP, it returns the address of the pointer itself. Okay. So let's just run this and see that what happens. Okay, it's taking some time, I guess. Okay. I guess there is something wrong here. Okay, so it was taking some time. Maybe the internet connection took some time. Okay, here you can see that the first thing that it actually prints is the value. Okay, the value of the VAR, which is line number 19. The second thing that it prints is line number 22, which is the address that is stored in IP. And you can see that the second line is printing the address. 25, line number 25 is printing what? It's printing the address of the variable var, and you can see कि IP के अंदर जो है वो var का address पड़ा हुआ है, and because you are actually dereferencing that variable, therefore उसका address आपके पास आ जाता है. Then line number 28, and you can see that both these addresses are exactly the same. इसका मतलब IP and ampersand var are actually the same addresses. And then you have the dereferencing thing, which is static IP, that should return the value of the variable, and the value of the variable that is stored in this particular case is 20. So 20 is printed, and the last thing that it prints, which is 31, that is ampersand IP. Ampersand IP is actually returning the address of the pointer. the address of the pointer, not the address that is stored in the pointer, but the address of the pointer itself, and that comes out to be another address. Okay? So it's not really necessary कि contiguous form में आएंगे या these addresses are connected to each other at all. The address of the pointer could be anywhere. Okay? So you don't need to confuse yourself about this. I hope this very simple example explains the difference between the address that a pointer is pointing to and the address of the pointer itself. Okay, so let's just move on to another example here. I'll just show you another example, run another example and show you कि pointer में और क्या चीज़ हो सकती है. Okay, here is a very simple example, and that simple example is actually explaining कि a pointer could point to a different variable as well. Okay, so you can actually do that. A pointer could point to a different variable as well. So let me just write down here that now I define another variable which is int var new variable. Let me call it new var, and let me put it equal to another value which is 30. And now I can initialize this IP with new var. Okay, and let me just run this program. So now you can see the difference कि अब वही IP है, which is the pointer. Now in the first part it's actually pointing to var. The second part, which is line number 18 here, it's now being initialized by pointing it to a new variable which is new var. Now let me just run this program and see whether it compiles correctly or not. Let me just run it, and it compiles correctly, right? It compiles correctly, but you can see the difference now. Line number 21 is printing the variable var, okay, which is 20, which is already there. Line number 24 is printing the address that is stored in IP. Now the address that is stored in IP is a different address from var. It's not the var address, it's actually the address of the new variable. It is the address of the new variable. Okay, and we'll just check it in a while, okay, whether it's correct or not. Then you can see कि var का जो address है that is different, which is from line number 27. You can see line number 27 gives the address of var, which is different from the address of IP, because now IP is actually pointing to a different variable, not to var. It's pointing to a different variable. So static IP would return the value that it's value that is stored against that address जो कि आपने pointer के अंदर store किया हुआ है. So that returns a value of 30 because new var की अब value जो आपके पास आई है that is actually 30, and that is actually stored here, and then the address of the pointer itself is actually being returned. Let's see कि अगर मैं यहाँ पे let's say यहाँ पे मैं थोड़ी सी change कर देता हूँ. I can actually write down another cout statement which would now give you the address of the new variable. Let's just see कि the address of the new variable क्या है. Okay, and it should be the same as the address of the pointer. Let me just run this, and now you can see कि the address of IP, which is line number 24, that is the second line here, is the same as the third print statement, the third print or the fourth print statement, which is line number 28. So line number 28 का जो print है, that is this, which is highlighted here. Line number 24 का जो print है, that is statement number 2, and these two addresses are exactly the same. Okay, these two addresses are exactly the same. So you can use this pointer to point to any variable within your program, provided that it has the same type. ओके, सो आई होप दिस क्लैरिफाइज कि पॉइंटर को आप यूज़ कर सकते हैं इन ऑर्डर टू पॉइंट टू अ डिफरेंट वेरिएबल. ओके, now another example of pointers, one is to point to different variables. Now we have already studied arrays. Let's see कि arrays के अंदर pointers को कैसे आप यूज़ कर सकते हैं. And I'll be showing you an example जिसमें we are using pointers to enter the values in an array. Okay, so let's just look at this program. So in your main program we have declared an array of size 5 of size 6 with an index starting from 0. So it has the size that is being specified here. So starting from 0 it's of size 6. Then we have a pointer. The declaration of the pointer is there. And then what we are doing is that line number 17 is initializing a pointer. The initialization of the pointer is actually given by p is assigned to numbers. Numbers is an array. An array, the name of the array actually stores what? It stores the address of the first element of the array. So numbers here would store the first element of the address of the first element of the array. Okay, so numbers also stores an address and pointer also stores an address. Therefore p can be assigned directly numbers. ठीक है, सो नंबर्स क्या होगा, वो पहली वैल्यू को एड्रेस कर रहा होगा, उसका पहला एड्रेस होगा. एंड देन आई कैन यूज नंबर्स, आई कैन इंक्रीमेंट द नंबर बाय 1 टू गेट द सेकंड एड्रेस जो कि अरे का है. Okay, so line number 17 is actually initializing the pointer with numbers, and then this part here is assigning a value to that pointer. So static p is 10. Static p is 10 means that the address that is stored inside the pointer, that address should have a value 10. And what is that address? That is the first memory location that you have for your array. Okay, so the first element of the array will have a value 10. And then there are multiple ways in which you can assign the values to the second, third, fourth. And just for ease, I have actually listed possible ways in which you can assign the values. Okay, you want to increment the pointer by 1 in order to assign the second value of the memory location. So the second element of the array could actually be assigned by using p++. P++ would add or increment 1 to p. So this would be p is assigned a value of p+1. This is similar to what it actually says. So this is what pointer arithmetic would mean. Okay, so p static assigned a value of 20. Now what is the value of p? P is now pointing to the second location. Okay, and that is 20. And I can use this repeatedly. I can use p++ again, and I can actually use this repeatedly in order to assign the next value. I can use that in order to assign the next value. So this is like 18 is one of the ways in which you can increment the pointer address and keep on assigning new values. Remember, when you are assigning a value, you have to dereference the pointer, and that is by using this static statement. Another way is to explicitly dereference the numbers, the arrays, and that is say code which is given at line number 19. Line number 19 is actually what it's actually doing. It's actually saying that now what will happen is that the third location in your array, the value that you have in the third location, that is given by numbers bracket 2. Okay? And this would return the value at the third position. And you are using an ampersand because numbers within brackets 2 is representing a value rather than a memory address. Okay? Numbers alone will represent a memory address, whereas numbers with an argument would represent the value. Therefore, in order to store the address of the third location, you will use an ampersand sign with this, and then again, as it is done in 17 and 18, you can put a value there. ठीक है, you can use this syntax as well in order to put the third value here. The only thing that you can change in 19 is that instead of 2 you can put 3 here and assign a new value to the fourth position. If you put a value 4 here, you will assign the value to the fifth position, and so on and so forth. So that's another way of assigning values using pointers. 20 gives another way of assigning a value, and that is by simple arithmetics. Numbers plus 3. Numbers plus 3. Numbers is an address, plus 3 would do what? This would take the fourth address in the array, and that would be assigned to the pointer, and that pointer can then be given a value by dereferencing command, a value of 40. And similarly, line number 21 is again another way of assigning a value, where you have static and within bracket you have p plus 4. Static p plus 4 would assign the fifth, the final value or the fifth location of the address. Okay, and then there is a for loop to print these values that you have actually assigned. Now remember, 17 to 21, these are the different ways in which you can access the memory locations of an array and assign values. Okay? You can use these repeatedly, you can use this incrementally in order to any one of these methods to assign a value to an array. And the purpose of writing all these statements is that you can actually have a flavor of using these pointers to assign different values to different memory locations. So in this simple piece of code, you will know the different ways of doing it. Okay, so let me just run this code and see that what happens. And you will see here that the array has been printed. Achha, just to illustrate, if I comment this out and I use p plus plus again, and then I say p is equal to 30, and I'll just run this code again. Okay, I'll just run this code again. Let me just run this code again. Okay, so I guess there is an issue here. Okay, so I was using a capital P here. So you can see it's actually generating the same result. ठीक है, क्योंकि पीस को आपने नंबर से इनिशियलाइज किया, नंबर्स में फिर आपने 18 लाइन ने एक उसमें ऐड कर दिया, लाइन नंबर 19 में एक और उसने ऐड कर दिया, तो you will see that 10, 20 and 30 have been actually added. Similarly, any of these methods can actually be used. For example, मैंने अगर fourth value को भी मैंने 40 करना है, I can actually use line number 21 again. I mean, instead of 3 मैं इसमें 4 ऐड कर दूंगा, and then I can repeatedly use this. ठीक है, so this is just an illustration that how pointers can actually be used. Okay, now you can use pointers as arguments to a function also. I mean, you can use pointers and you can as arguments to a function. Here is an example for that. Okay, so let me just show you that example. So here is a function that multiplies a number with itself, and I think it's a very simple program. You can declare a variable, write down a function, within the function multiply the variable with itself, and you will get the square of that number. But now I'm just using pointers in order to illustrate कि क्या होगा. अच्छा, यहाँ पे मेन प्रोग्राम से पहले, outside the main program, I am declaring a variable, I am declaring a function which is square by ptr. Ptr is the square by using the pointers. This is the return type, and return type is void. Okay, so we need not to write down an explicit return statement here. Square by ptr is the name of the function itself, and the argument, just look at the argument. The argument is just similar to the declaration part of a pointer. So we are declaring a pointer here. That means that the argument that you are expecting here is an address, is a memory allocation, or is a memory. memory address that is being expected as an argument to this particular function. And that memory address, when you will pass that memory address to this function, then numptr will get initialized. Numptr will get the address of the variable that you will be passing as an argument to this function. And then what this function will actually be doing, numptr, static numptr is primarily a value. You already know, dereferencing से आपको पता चल गया कि it's actually a value. Now that value is being updated by multiplying numptr with numptr. Okay, so static numptr, this static represents multiplication, and you multiply again with static numptr. So static numptr is a value that's being multiplied with static numptr, और फिर आपने numptr को update कर दिया. So this is a very simple program. The program actually takes in the address of the variable जो जिसको आप square करना चाहते हैं. And let's come to the main program. So main program के अंदर you have a variable that has been initialized, x is equal to 5, and it's of type integer, and यहाँ पे भी type integer है. You have to keep this in mind. Here this program will not work because आपने क्या किया है, आपने एक variable को pass कर दिया है line number 20 में in this function. Now this will not work. The reason is obvious, because it is expecting an address of a variable rather than a variable itself. Okay, so you will have to use an ampersand sign. And now x का जो address है, that will be passed on to this function square by ptr. And this is analogous to saying that we are writing a statement which says that integer static numptr assignment sign ampersand x. So this is very analogous to this. So this binds with this, or in other words, this initializes this pointer. Okay, and then we just see that what is the cout value in this particular case, and you can also print out the cout value, or you can also try to print the static numptr. You can see that whether this will work or not with static numptr or not. But let's see कि cout के साथ ये क्या return करता है. Now you need to remember this कि x को क्या चीज़ point कर रही है, numptr. तो अगर आप x को print करेंगे, you will actually printing the value that is present at static numptr. ठीक है. Okay, so let me just run this. Here you go, right? और अगर मैं यहाँ पे ये कर दूँ static num ptr, where p is capital by the way, और अगर इसको मैं रिमूव कर दूँ तो what do you expect, क्या होना चाहिए? Let me just run this. Okay, there is this compilation error here, and I think by now you should be able to know कि ये क्यों आया है, ये compilation error क्यों आया है. ठीक है, you should be very clear about that. I hope you can understand that कि ये क्यों आया है. I'll leave it as an exercise for you. It's very simple कि ये क्यों आया. So now I'll move on to the next part of our discussion, and that next part of our discussion is function pointers. So far what we have been discussing is that pointer to a variable. So a pointer could point to the address of a variable, but now what we'll do is that we'll use pointers that would point to a piece of code, a section of code, or a subset of your main code. Function is a subset of your main code. So therefore you can also write down pointers that point to a function rather than a variable. सिर्फ एक वेरिएबल को पॉइंटर्स ज़रूरी नहीं है कि पॉइंट करें, the pointers could point to a function also. ठीक है, so for that purpose let me just use the same say environment, and I'll just write down here the simple syntax that is being used. So here you have the type. फंक्शन पॉइंटर्स को आपने कैसे डिफाइन करना है, टाइप आपने डिफाइन करनी है विच इज क्वाइट ऑब्वियस, followed by within brackets static pointer name, and let me just call it function pointer name. So then you have the static function pointer name. Remember, this has to be in brackets, followed by the list of argument types, or types with the names of the variable. So list of argument types. अगर जिस फंक्शन को आप पॉइंट करना चाह रहे हैं उसमें 2 आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हैं, तो यू विल हैव टू राइट डाउन दोज 2 आर्ग्यूमेंट्स, देयर टाइप्स. ठीक है, सो दिस इज द डिक्लेरेशन. ठीक है, एन एग्जांपल would be that I can write down, let's say, integer followed by static followed by fptr, which is the name of the function ptr, followed by int comma int. That means that line number 10 is actually telling me that I am generating a pointer that would always point to a function that takes in 2 arguments which are of type integer. And the function pointer is also an integer. That is the return type of the function itself. And fptr is the name of the function. ठीक है जी. अच्छा, so this is an example. And then in the next line, once you have declared this, in the next line, okay, sorry, in the next line, you can, let's say, write down, let me just write it down in a generic way. I can actually write down this and I'll put it equal to function name. जो भी function का नाम है, I'll just put down that name here. ठीक है, function name. So that is the first part is the declaration part, and the second part is the initialization part. Okay, so this is the syntax. Let me just show you the same thing with the help of a small piece of code. Okay, let's just use this with a small piece of code. Okay, here is a small program. Let me just segregate this program. I mean, I've defined a function integer that takes in 2 arguments, x and y, of type integer. The return type of this function is also an integer. There is another function here which is subtract, that takes another what you can say 2 arguments, right, and it returns the difference between these 2. The return type is again integer. And then we go to the main program. In the main program, you can see that this line here is primarily doing what? This line here, okay, this line number 20, is declaring funptr, a pointer to a function that takes in 2 arguments and its type int. Now add and subtract, both of them are taking 2 arguments and both of them are of type integer. Therefore this funptr can point to any of these 2 functions. Okay, so let's initialize this funptr. funptr को initialize यहाँ पे हमने किया है by pointing funptr to add. So it's pointing funptr to add. So this is basically the initialization phase. Line number 20 is the declaration part. Line number 23 is the initialization part. Okay, and what is happening in line number 25? Line number 25 mein we are using what? We are using the function pointers to call the function add. Okay, so funptr, because it points to add, जब मैं fun ptr followed by 7,10 करूँगा, this would automatically call add, क्योंकि fun ptr is a pointer and it's now pointing to a function add that takes in two arguments which are of integer type, 7 and 10. ठीक है, तो इसका रिजल्ट क्या आना चाहिए? 17. ठीक है. अच्छा, now the same function could point to the other variable, the other function name, which is subtract. Again, fun ptr can be used here, and this would return what? This would return the difference between 10 and 7, which is stored in a variable which is of type integer diff. Let's print these two. तो पहले वाले ने sum print किया है, पहले वाले ने sum निकाला है, दूसरे वाले ने डिफरेंस निकाल लिया. ठीक है, तो हमने यहाँ पे सम को प्रिंट करना है और डिफरेंस को प्रिंट करना है. एंड लेट्स सी व्हाट इज द रिजल्ट. लेट मी जस्ट रन दिस. ओके, यू कैन सी दैट द सम इज 17 एंड द डिफरेंस इज 3. ठीक है, लेट मी जस्ट मॉडिफाई दिस फंक्शन अ लिटिल बिट. लेट्स से कि मैं इसको कर देता हूँ स्क्वायर and I take in only one variable. इस वेरिएबल को आप स्क्वायर करें और यहाँ पे the return is this x multiplied by x. ठीक है जी. Now let me just for ease, let me just comment out this bit here, और I'll just remove this for ease. ठीक है, और यहाँ पे मैं इसको स्क्वायर कर देता हूँ और यहाँ पे आ जाएगा SQ, and let me just print square and I have SQ here. ठीक है जी, इसको मैं कमेंट आउट कर देता हूँ. लेट मी जस्ट रन दिस. इट टेक्स इन वन आर्ग्यूमेंट. अब मैंने फंक्शन डेफिनेशन के अंदर ये कहा हुआ है, यानी फंक्शन पॉइंटर डेफिनेशन के अंदर कहा हुआ है कि इट शुड पॉइंट टू अ फंक्शन जिसमें दो आर्ग्यूमेंट्स होंगे. लेकिन आई एम पॉइंटिंग दिस, आई एम इनिशियलाइजिंग इट विद अ फंक्शन जिसमें एक आर्ग्यूमेंट है. सो दिस विल नॉट वर्क. ठीक है, in order for this to work, I'll have to remove this from here. ठीक है, and now it works. Right? Now it works. So I have this. This is clear. ठीक है जी. और अगर मैं let's say कि यहाँ पे कुछ इस तरह से कर देता हूँ और फंक्शन के अंदर if I can do a lot of different things, int x कर देता हूँ and I can actually put some value here 10. इसके अंदर ही मैं इसको initialize कर देता हूँ. I'll put some value here. I'll not be using any function here. इसको मैं square से initialize कर देता हूँ and I just run this. Will this work or not? The question is that will this run? Will this run or not? Okay, let me just run it. If it doesn't run, then you will have to figure out कि ये क्यों नहीं run कर रहा. If it runs, then the conclusion is quite obvious. Then you can try to conclude this and see कि क्या होता है. Okay, so you can see that it works. Right? It gives you a value. Right, so this is about function pointers, a very simple approach in which function pointers can actually be used. There are various ways in which function pointers can actually be used. Function pointers can be used as an argument to another function. So the argument of a function is another function. तो उसमें भी आप use कर सकते हैं function pointers को. then there is another and there are example in the slides, I think, जहाँ पे आप ये कर सकते हैं. There is another concept that is very important that relates to the functions, the pointers, and that is the concept of the null pointer. So a null pointer, here you can see that in the main program I've declared a pointer and I've put it equal to null. This keyword null is doing what? Let me just run this code and I'm printing what PTR contains. Let me just run this code and you will see that the PTR contains the value 0. 0 is no memory location. So therefore this PTR is pointing to nothing. And any pointer that points to nothing is a null PTR, or a null pointer. Now, why is this important? Because if you have multiple pointers that are present in your program, there could be certain pointers that are pointing to nothing. There might be a possibility that they are not pointing to anything. Then there are other pointers that are pointing to some memory allocation or memory locations. ठीक है, तो कुछ uninitialized होंगे, कुछ initialized होंगे. So this is a sort of uninitialized variable. आपने उसको initialize उस तरीके से नहीं किया. And at times it might happen कि अगर आप उसको null नहीं करते, या if you don't assign it or initialize it, it might contain some junk value or या उसमें कुछ garbage आ सकती है. ठीक है. So details will be clear later on जब हम इसकी मज़ीद discussion इसमें करेंगे. लेकिन in order to check whether a particular pointer is initialized or not, you can use a simple command. Line number 16, say line number 18. Line number 16 and 18, what are these doing? So the line number 16 is saying if PTR would be true if the pointer has been initialized, and it will be false if the pointer has not been initialized. Okay? So if not PTR will be true if PTR is not initialized. That means कि अगर वो null PTR है, if it is not initialized, then if not PTR will be true. If not PTR will be true. So if statement can actually be used to identify whether initialization has taken place or not. Okay? So if it is a null pointer or not. Okay? So if it is null pointer, if it is a null pointer, then line number 18 will become true. Okay. And if it is not, then line number 16 will become true. Okay. Let me just run this. PTR is a null pointer. So it says that not in use. So that means that line number 18 is true. Line number 16 is not true. Therefore, cout statement at line number 17 will not take place. So यहाँ से आप ये आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं whether initialization has taken place or not, और ये क्यों important है कि initialization हुई है या नहीं हुई, because there could be a lot of garbage that could be present in your program. ठीक है, you can lose track of some of the pointers, and in order to keep track of those pointers, you need to know कि वो initialize हुए हैं या नहीं. And this is like one way of finding out whether that has been initialized or not. Okay, the last thing before I end this program is the use of the void pointers. Now this is also a very important concept, the use of void pointers. Void pointers का मतलब ये है कि you really don't define the pointer type. ठीक है? So here is a program. एक आपने variable int a किया, उसको आपने 7 असाइन कर दिया, float b किया, 7.6 वैल्यू असाइन कर दी, एंड देन लाइन नंबर 16 में आपने एक वेरिएबल, एक पॉइंटर डिक्लेयर किया है विच इज़ ऑफ टाइप void. लाइन नंबर 16 void, that means that it's the return type of the variable that p will be pointing to has not been defined. ठीक है, तो अगर अब ये p जो है क्या a को पॉइंट कर सकता है या नहीं कर सकता, और क्या ये p जो है वो b को पॉइंट कर सकता है या नहीं कर सकता? The answer is yes, it can do that. The only way that you can return this, for example, line number 18 जो है, here the pointer points to the memory space of a. ठीक है, line number 21 memory space of b को point कर रहा है. लेकिन in order to find out whether what is the content of the P, you will actually have to typecast it. Okay, typecast it, and the concept of the typecast I think should be clear from CS100. If it is not, then I think you can discuss this one with one of the TS, or at some later stage, at some advanced concepts. Along with some advanced concepts, we'll discuss this again. Okay, so what is this typecasting is actually doing? Typecasting is actually temporarily saying that this pointer would return a type integer. Okay. Line number 22, it's saying that now instead of integer, it would actually be pointing to a float variable. तो आप इनिशियलाइजेशन उसकी किसी भी तरह के पॉइंटर से कर सकते हैं, चाहे वो इंटीजर हो. लाइन नंबर 18, लाइन नंबर 21, both of them are valid. लेकिन if you want to retrieve the value, if you want to print the value, then you will have to typecast it. And typecasting is done in line number 19 and line number 22. If I run this code now, you will see that it gives an error. It's primarily because I haven't really put this ampersand, these symbols here. I'll just run this again. And now you can see कि A की वैल्यू भी वो प्रिंट कर रहा है और B की वैल्यू भी वो प्रिंट कर रहा है, टाइपकास्टिंग की वजह से. ठीक है. सो void pointer आप डिफाइन कर सकते हैं. यू कैन यूज दिस void pointer टू पॉइंट टू एनी टाइप ऑफ वेरिएबल, राइट. लेकिन जब आपने वैल्यू रिट्रीव करनी है, जब आपने उस वैल्यू को यूज़ करना है, इनिशियलाइजेशन तो आप कर सकते हैं, लेकिन यूज़ करने के लिए आपको टाइपकास्ट करना पड़ेगा. एंड द एग्जांपल ऑफ डूइंग दैट टाइपकास्टिंग, द सिंटैक्स इज एक्चुअली गिवन ऑन लाइन नंबर 19 and line number 22. So instead of declaring two separate pointers, आप एक ही pointer declare कर सकते हैं of different types of variables, and then you can use that pointer. Okay. I think this actually finishes our discussion on pointers. I'll upload this video at my YouTube channel. You can actually go over this, and if you have any questions, you can always contact me or any of the TS. Okay, ji. Thank you very much.